Today we're going to be taking a look at Ansible and how you can leverage it to essentially streamline any of your node operations. You guys may be aware I run tons of nodes. Pre-search, I've ran Flux nodes before, Incognito. There's various nodes that I run to earn passive income and to support those networks. And one of the things that you'll learn as you scale those out, it's a lot of management. Now, we've seen this a lot with Flux lately, where they'll push out an update, a bunch of nodes will go offline, you really don't know, unless you're really monitoring those super tightly. And then a lot of it is you got to rebuild the node. You basically got to wipe the OS, do a fresh install, and then reinstall all the components. This is where home lab automation can come into play, where you can essentially have it one click redeploy everything for you, or even monitor it and have it auto redeploy if it detects an issue. Up until recently, Ansible was super popular, but it didn't have a web UI component to it. It was all CLI based. It was kind of more of a pain to manage than anything else, at least in my opinion. It was just easier to, SSH into your servers, fix the issues, and go on your way. However, Semaphore has kind of changed that, and they've built a really nice UI on top of Ansible. And we're going to go ahead and install it today. Get everything up and running. I'm going to kind of walk through the components, walk through a quick playbook of how we can just use it to keep our systems up to date. And then maybe in a future video, I might cover installing Presearch and also installing maybe Mysterium. Those are two use cases I have with it, as well as some other things. So right off the bat, if we take a look at Ansible, as I mentioned, Ansible has been around for a while. It was actually created by Red Hat, and it essentially allows you to put in the framework to allow you to push out updates and just run remote commands on any of your remote servers anytime you want. They can be local to your own network, or they can be available over the internet. All they need is SSH access. So if you can SSH into it, then you can essentially use Ansible. However, it's modern age, and CLI can become cumbersome and difficult to use. So this is where Semaphore comes in. Semaphore is essentially this dashboard that is built on top of Ansible and allows you to manage everything from within the dashboard. You don't really have to access the CLI at all. You still have to create the playbook files, but once those are created and hosted in something like GitHub, then it's super easy to use the Ansible UI. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and do the install. It's actually really simple to install both Ansible and Semaphore. You can run them in Docker, which is what I'm personally doing. And I'm actually going to be running these from my Synology NAS. So I've already SSH'd into my NAS. And what we're going to do is, if we do an ls, we're going to create, I'm already in my volume 1 data folder. This is kind of my data store for my NAS. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to do mkdir, and I'm going to name this Semaphore. Actually, we'll name this Ansible -Semaphore. And then we're going to move into that folder. And now we just need to create a Docker Compose file. So I'm going to do a nano docker-compose.yml. And I've already put together a template that you can use. And so literally all you have to do is copy and paste this. And we can walk through this real quick. Essentially, you have two options. You can either run a Postgres database or a MySQL database. I'm choosing to use MySQL. And this is going to set up a MySQL container. It's also going to set up the Semaphore container. The purpose of the MySQL container is to hold all of your configurations so that they persist across upgrades. And it just makes it easier to manage and more efficient when Ansible is running. In addition to that, so here you can see we're setting up the database connection information. And then obviously the same admin portal. If you want to set an admin username and password, you can set that here. That will be the credential you will use to log into the portal. This access key encryption, we need to regenerate this. I'm going to show you how to regenerate this. It will be unique to your system. There's a simple command to run to generate that, which we'll do in a minute. And then the LDAP stuff I don't really use, so it's pretty much all turned off. However, if you are running Active Directory, you can technically use LDAP. And this Ansible host key checking, I have this set to false. And essentially what this means is whenever you use PuTTY and you SSH into a server for the first time, it'll prompt you with a SSH fingerprint. It asks you if you want to add to the key store. By default, Ansible will reject every single key if it's not in the key store. So if you've never connected to it from the Ansible server, it'll just reject it. So I'm basically turning off that checking because we're going to be giving it credentials to connect to it anyways. And we're basically just creating a volume to store all of that on. So we're going to do Control X, Y, enter to save. And now we need to run the command to generate the Ansible encryption key. So to do that, the command is just going to be head-c32/dev/urandom. It's going to generate a random base 64. Go ahead and hit enter. That's going to get you a unique key. So then what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and copy that. Then we're going to go back into our Docker Compose file. And we're going to find that encryption line. So the Semaphore access encryption, access key encryption, we're just going to paste in that value. Do Control X, Y, enter to save. And now we're essentially ready to run this in Docker. Now that we got the encryption key in the file, everything's pretty much good to go. Now we can just do a sudo docker compose, docker-compose up, and then / detach. This is basically going to grab that configuration file that contains everything to run the Docker. It's going to start it, and it's going to detach from it so that everything is running in the background. And just give it a few moments, and we should see it essentially creating those containers. And here you can see it created the volume for the MySQL database. Now it's creating the actual MySQL container. And then next, it's going to create the Ansible Semaphore, which is the web UI container. So you want to wait till all of those are complete. And then once that's complete, you're still going to want to give it a couple minutes. It does take, it could take a few moments for all the services to start up and for it to basically kind of build the data structure on that first launch. So just be patient with it, and then we'll be able to hop on over to the web UI, and we should be able to access it on port 3000. After a minute or two, we can head on over to the IP address :3000, and you should get presented with the login page. And our username and password is going to be what we defined as the admin account and password in the compose file. So that's going to be admin and admin. Go ahead and hit sign in. And it's going to sign us in. And be patient on first load. On first login. This may take a moment or two for it to fully load everything. Alright, and then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on dark mode, which you can toggle down here. And we need to create a project. So I'm just going to call this primary. This doesn't really matter. I'm going to go ahead and say create. This is just kind of a way for you to group your configurations together. And so now what you're going to see, if you've used Ansible before, this is going to look relatively similar. However, if you haven't, it's pretty straightforward. You have tasks, and these are basically jobs that you want it to run, and you can define a cron schedule for those. And basically, it's going to execute a playbook. Now you need to tie an inventory, a repository, and an environment. So the repository is like the GitHub repo where all your playbooks are going to live. It's just kind of really pointing it to a folder. Inventory is going to be a list of IP addresses for all of your servers. And then if you notice here, it has a link to user credentials and sudo credentials. Those will be in your key store. So that's pretty much the basis of it. And then environment, these are going to be any type of params that you need to send to your playbook. So for the purposes of this video, I have already set up and I host in my GitHub repo this Ansible templates repository. If you go in here, today we're going to be using this Linux package updater as a sample. And all this does is this just runs the apt update and apt upgrade commands remotely. So to configure this, I'm going to go ahead and grab the git clone path. And then we're going to head back on over to Ansible. We're going to set that up as a repository. So we're going to say new repository. We're going to put in that URL. It's going to detect as HTTPS. You need to specify the branch. For me, it's called main. If you're unsure of what it is, it's going to be this drop down right here. This is your branch. And the access key we're not going to use. But if you notice, it's required. So what we want to do is we want to hit cancel here first. We have to create a key store. And we're basically going to call this, under type, we're going to pick none. And we're just going to call anonymous for the key name. And this basically means public access, no credentials are required. So we're going to come back over to repository, paste in that URL again. For access key, we're going to select anonymous. Branch, we're going to type main. And I'm just going to call this retro mic Ansible templates. We're going to say create. And then for environment, for this specific example, I don't have any parameters I need to send. However, environments are required. So what we can do is we can just say not applicable. And then here, you just need to do empty curly braces. So open and close, hit save. And then our inventory, in here, we need to specify the server that we want to connect to. But before we do this, I need to define the user credentials for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go back over to key store. I'm going to say new key. I'm going to do I'm going to do login with password. If you want to do an SSH key, you can do that. But for me, I'm going to do a login with a password. And I'm just going to call this, as an example, we use my incognito node. That's probably the easiest thing to start with. And that uses my standard set of credentials that I typically use on my home servers. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my username and password here. And when you enter that, the password is going to show as plain text. However, if you come in and you do edit, you're going to notice the credentials don't show here. You can hit override and you can change them. However, you have no way to view them once you set them up, so just keep that in mind. Now we're going to go back over to inventory. We're going to say new inventory. And my user credentials, I'm going to do the standard credentials. My sudo credentials, I don't need these. However, I can pick standard credentials just because that account does have sudo access. For the type, we're going to do file. Or sorry, we're going to do static here. And this allows us to specify a list of IP addresses. So for me, it's going to be 192.168.1.124, I believe. Now, if you have, let's say you've got like 30 VMs you're running on your home network, you can literally just put a line break in here and specify all of those. So if I had something like 125, 126, 127, I could literally specify all these, and when this job runs, it's going to ripple through and run it on every single server. And for me, I'm just going to do one for this example, and I'm going to call this We're actually going to call this all servers. We can always append it later. And then we can create a task template. So we do new template. And then here I'm just going to call this update Linux packages. For the inventory, we're going to do all servers. The repository is going to be our repo. Our environment's going to be not applicable, and we don't have a vault password. And now the playbook file name. This needs to be this file name here. And if you're doing, like if you were doing pre-search, you would do presearch/presearch.yml. In our case, we're just going to be using this file at the root. And so we're going to put in Linux package updater.yml. And what's going to happen is every time this job runs, it's going to do a git clone from the repository. So it's always going to pull the latest version. And then it's going to run that. And then if we want to run this on a recurring basis, we can put a cron schedule in here. And if you're unfamiliar with cron, you can literally click here. We can see that they have support for day of the week, month, day of the month, hours, minutes, and seconds. And they do give you some examples here. So if you wanted to run this daily, which is actually what I'm going to do, we're just going to go ahead and copy this. And we're going to be able to put this in here. We're just going to paste that in there. And that's essentially going to run it every day at midnight. Again, you don't have to put cron schedule in here. You can just set this to run one time. So if you don't want the schedule, we can just say create. And then it's going to create this task. You can see that it's never ran. So we go ahead and click on the package name. We now have the option to see all the execution history, but we're going to say run. And this is going to allow us to run it. Now, if we want to do a dry run, we can do that by just checking this box, hitting run. And here you can see it queued it up. And now it's running it. So you can see here it cloned that repository. And now it's basically gathering details of the server. You can see it SSH'd into the server. And there you can see it ran the package updater. And change basically means that it changed something. If you just see OK, then that typically means it didn't make any changes to the system. So at this point, it actually ran it. So now if we refresh this, there you can see success. And if we run that again without the dry run, we can go ahead and just say run. And there you can see it didn't actually have to download the repo again because it's already cached and there were no changes. So it's running it now. You can see it connected to it. And you'll notice this time, because we're not doing a dry run, it's going to take quite a bit longer. Because it's actually physically going out and executing a real update on the server. And as you can see, it completed. And so it changed on the apt package updater. It did run. So that task successfully ran. And we have successfully updated our packages on the server. Now, if we want to validate that, let's go ahead and hop on over to the server. And let's run a sudo apt update. There shouldn't be anything to update. And there you can see all the packages are already updated. And if we run an upgrade, once again, there shouldn't be anything to upgrade. And there you can see There's nothing to upgrade. So it has successfully ran against it. And if we wanted to cron that so that this runs like every night, we could certainly do that. And there you have it. Super easy way to automatically update all of your packages, either with a single click or by setting up a cron schedule. This is personally how I manage the updates on all of my servers. And in some future videos, I will cover how to use this to deploy Mysterium and also how to deploy Presearch.